didn't want to make a decision. You know how it is when you're not feeling well. You don't want to make anything too radical a decision. And he couldn't deal with it. His wife, Alexandra Feodorovna, said, well, I think you need a break, a change of air. Even though they were not that close, he agreed, and so they began a tour to rest him up. And it was apparently a little bit exercising, but they ended up in Taganrog on the Black Sea there. They didn't see Madame Kruitner. And he was not well, in bed a little bit, out of it, in and out. Well, now, what was happening in the capital was that the radicals had taken over the movement to change. And they had decided that the only way Russia would ever survive was to get rid of the Romanovs and the imperial system and set up a constitutional government. These were radicals now. They did not want to wait any longer. And if you had to kill them, the Romanovs. The emperor would be the first to be dispatched. But he wasn't in town. He was down there in the Black Sea. Well, we'll wait till he gets back and then we'll kill him. Well, in December of 1824, the news reached the capital that Alexander had died. He was 48 years old. Oh, shoot. Now I'll have to wait for the next one to be proclaimed emperor. And we kill him. But the imperial family was in a great frou-frou over who that next one would be, because Alexander's next brother, Constantine, who should rightfully be the one, said, I have married, he married a Polish woman, a morganatic marriage. He could not, under the law, be emperor with a morganatic marriage, and he didn't want to come back, and he didn't want to be emperor. He said, give it to Nicholas, his younger brother. Well, Nicholas said, I am not going to preempt my older brother Constantine. It's unconstitutional, we'd say. Well, of course, then the family was fighting over who was going to be emperor. And in the middle of this, a rumor began to spread in the capital that the casket containing Alexander, coming back from Taganrog, was a fraud, that he wasn't dead at all, that he'd gone off like he'd always been talking to do, gone off in the hills to become a hermit. Well, now we're going to have to find out if there's a real Alexander or not. It took 2 months for the casket to get to St. Petersburg. And by that time, the family was in a great state. The Empress Dowager, their mother, Alexandra, said, never mind, open the casket. I will identify Alexander, and then we'll see. Open the box. That's him. Bang. We had the funeral. Now you, Nicholas, are emperor. Well, that settled it. Now the emperor had been proclaimed. And in December of 1825, the rebels attacked. We call it a Decembrist revolt because it occurred in that month. Well, what about Nicholas? Nicholas was 29. He'd spent a life in the military. He was a well-trained officer. He knew what to do. Most of the Guards regiments were loyal to the empire. Some of them had gone over to the Decembrist revolt, and Nicholas tried to negotiate with them and failed. And there was a pitched battle in St. Petersburg. A virtual civil war went on for nearly a week. But the imperial army under Nicholas crushed it. And the ringleaders of the Decembrist revolt were rounded up and hanged. And the rest of them to exile in Siberia. And that was the end of the Decembrist effort. But this is only a portent of what is coming. Remember all the revolts of the past, Stenka Razin, Pugachev, all the others? These were well out in the countryside, way off in the hinterlands. This revolt took place right in the shadow of the throne in the capital city. Things were moving fast. Well, Nicholas, he was tall and handsome. He was handsomer than Alexander ever was. But he was totally without Alexander's charms. Now, Nicholas, well, first of all, he began to reverse all of Alexander's timid liberalizations. He went regulation mad, just as Paul, his father, had done. Nicholas motto was orthodoxy, autocracy, and national unity. Russia, right or wrong. You ever heard that one before? People with these idiot ribbons, you know. Well, they called him Nicholas the Stick because he was going around beating down any evidence of a change, anything modern or progressive, if you will. He established the dreaded 3rd Department Secret Police. That was vicious. They tortured the prisoners. It was a repressive regime. Repression was the theme of the day. There was a short war with Turkey because since the time of Peter the Great, the Russians have been trying to get their navy in the Black Sea out through the Bosphorus, the Dardanelles, into the Mediterranean. Well, the Turks controlled that part of the world, and they didn't let the Russians out. And Nicholas was defeated, mainly because in 1830, the Russian section of Poland, which had been divided in the previous century between the Austrians, the Russians, and the Prussians, the Russian section of Poland rebelled against its overlords. And Nicholas had to deal with this. He dealt with this in the cruelest, most violent way. The Polish people have never forgotten this. Now, we heard, none of you are old enough to remember World War II, but in World War II, the Polish people were terrified of invasion and occupation. It wasn't the Nazis. Yes, they were dreadful. It was the Russians they were afraid of. Well, the Polish thing took a better part of a year, and finally when it was squelched, my goodness, the revolution of 1848 swept Europe. Now this was generated by a social movement, we call it socialism, nothing wrong with that, to change the way the various governments treated working people. It was a workers' rebellion, and of course it was generated mainly by the publication of Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto and then other publications, first in London and then in Paris, 1848. The French government collapsed, the Austrian government teetered on it, the Prussians were in distress, the other German states, everybody was in a terrible condition of worry and agitation. The revolution swept everywhere. And Nicholas was not about to let it come into Russia. So he was running up and down the border, smacking anything that looked red. He called him the policeman of Europe. Well, no sooner had that quietened down than he had another try at getting the fleet out of the Black Sea. Another war with Turkey started. At this point, the French and the English declared war on Russia. We call this the Crimean War. It was lasted about 2 years, with an absolute disaster for everybody involved, maybe not Florence Nightingale, but everybody else. And Russia was, the English and the French did not want competition by the Russians economically or militarily in the Mediterranean. That was the whole thing. Well, the great fortress of Sevastopol on the tip of the Crimea was Russia's last holdout in this war. It went badly for them. And Nicholas was back and forth to the front frequently. In February of 1855, he had gone down to the front and he could see that it was hopeless. Everything was going badly. He went back to the capital, St. Petersburg, and in March he was obviously very depressed. He felt depraved, he felt betrayed, he felt a failure, he was disillusioned, and things were just as black as they could be. On the 2nd of March, I guess it was, his equerries put him to bed that night. And the next morning, when they went in to dress him, they found him dead on the floor. Now, he may have taken his own life in his depressed state. However, it now meant that his eldest surviving son would succeed him as Alexander II.